mass media often attributed to Chavez as this charismatic leader, which he is. And when you meet him, you can't be but impressed with some of the statements he makes. But he said to us when we met last year something very important. He says, one mistake we made is to think of socialism as a fixed model, the box. Capitalism this box, socialism that. And socialism has to be reinvented every time. And what have they done in Venezuela? Number one was when they came into power through an election, they started very cautiously, very reformist policies. The oil industry, the major oil company, was already a national company. Chavez and co. did not nationalize it, but they increased the levies on oil. They used the oil to spread healthcare and education programs quite rapidly, and they diversified whom to supply oil to, not just to the US market, away from that domination. That already was a threat for US imperialism in that country, and they tried to get rid of him in the coup of 2002. That was not followed by armed insurrection, that was followed by mass demonstration in the streets, people saying we will not leave this presidential palace until Chavez is back. After that, and that had an igniting effect in terms of conscientization of the power from below. It reminded me during our visit, and I was there with comrades from the Communist Party here from South Africa, of the 1980s in our own setting. A revolution that was based on mass mobilization, not some great leader sitting in office somewhere above giving the dictates. And in organizational terms, this mass mobilization has found way in maybe what Rosa Luxemburg envisaged as radical democracy. Community councils, 400 neighborhoods, that organize themselves and they take decision what they want to have done in their neighborhood and how. The funding for their activities comes directly from the oil revenue, and Chavez channels it to these councils, not through the civil service, the bloated bureaucracy that we're all sitting with in our country, but rather directly. About 70% of Venezuelans are today organized in community councils, and they've set up these community banks. There were also significant changes in economic policies, especially when foreign investment is leaving the country. Workers have taken over. There are now 800 workers-run factories in Venezuela. Not only did they take over, but they also changed the way the companies are run. Before, they were targeting foreign export markets, by and large. All these companies that were closed down. The workers that run the factories sit with surrounding communities through the community council, and they've shifted production towards meeting local needs, away from export production. And that has proved a very self-sustaining system. And thirdly, there was an aspect of cultural change in the whole process. Venezuelan culture was geared towards the Spanish inheritance, very typical colonial. And just to give you one figure, which is really striking, at the time of Chavez being elected, there were 600 cultural goods and practices identified in Venezuela. 10 years later, it was 90,000. Because all the indigenous cultural heritage, all the African Venezuelan inheritance was denied. So it's a process also of deep emancipation, and it reminded one of black consciousness movement. And finally, with that I end, Madam Chair, Venezuela has started a process of a completely different regional integration to what we've seen in SADC, for example. Not a capital-driven one, not the ShopRites in every corner. No, what they call ALBA, the Alternatives for Latin America, where countries group together on the basis of who can offer what and who needs what. Cuba supplies doctors and healthcare professionals to Venezuela. Venezuela provides oil to Cuba. Bolivia provides gas. And it is a kind of, if you like, fair trade model based on meeting needs in the subcontinent, inspired politically by the Bolivarian revolution, the liberation of Latin America as a whole. And I think we might not copy exactly what they've done, but the more I read about it and the more I learned about it, the more inspiring it has become. That an alternative can be built right now. And it is not the one box versus the other. It needs to be tailor-made to our conditions where we are, but the journey must start now. Thank you very much.